Going live.
Hey y'all, I am James Wright, and welcome to the shop. Tonight we are going to be doing our monthly Q&A, and so this is a chance you get to ask whatever questions you want. I can demonstrate things and talk through problems you have. If you are watching this recorded, go down in the description down below and you'll see all of the questions that have been asked, as well as timestamps beside them, so you can jump roughly to where they are in the video. And you'll see the time bar is actually broken up by all the questions down below. So it's going to be a fun one. For those of you who don't know, we do a live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Time. And most of the time there's some topic we'll be talking about, and I'll spend the first 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes talking in detail about that topic, and then we'll have a question and answer session after that. But we do often, usually the first one of the month, we're going to be doing an interview with someone else. That is actually going to be changing this month. It's going to be on the 30th. We are going to be doing an interview with Ann of all trades. So it'll be fun to have her on here. We might have Sarah up here and I will man the chat. But it will be good to have another perspective in the shop. So I'm really looking forward to that one. I've been wanting to have her on for a while. Every time we've tried to get together, things have just fallen apart. It's just like the story of the last year and a half. Oh, and then next week we're actually going to try something a little different. I have a fan from the channel who is going to be coming to the shop, and I've never met him before. He has a problem he wants me to fix, and so it's going to be a spur of the moment. I'm going to actually work with someone who is brand new to woodworking and running through problems and setting up something. And it looks like he's going to be bringing in a couple planes, and I'm going to be going through how do you tune them up, how do you set them up, how do you get them functioning, and teach someone in the shop so that he can do it. So it's a one-on-one, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot of little things that are just those aha moments that they're kind of simple to me, and so I don't even think to say them, but it'll be a good chance for you to learn it from someone learning the task for the first time as a one-on-one. So I'm hoping to do that about once a month, where we'll either bring someone in live or have someone on the screen where we can actually do a one-on-one work through on something fun. So if you have something like that you are interested in, let me know, and we'll see if we can make that happen.
I love how you're going to fix his problems.
We're going to fix your problems.
Are they permanently?
Oh, and for those of you wondering, this all here is not on Sarah's bench. See, I'm getting to it.
About a foot worth.
We have one of the 10 chairs that I was able to get finish on, and oh, you got to see this. This is the back on it, and it is absolutely just gorgeous. We're doing Rubio monocoat on it, and yeah, it is just beautiful. I'm loving the finish on this, and the quarter sawn, the book matched sides on these. They are kits from Matt Cremona. So yes, I'm going to be having 10 of these to go with my table, so we can actually have matching chairs
that aren't falling apart.
And hopefully I can teach my kids not to chew on them like beavers. We'll see. We had an incident like that today. I heard bang, 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 and I go around the corner, and my daughter has a hammer in her hand and is bashing on the corner trim on our house. And I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm bored." Oh yeah, we made the dining room table. I took it upstairs. Everything's happy. We shot the video. All of the guests leave. I turn around, and Arthur is chewing on the side of it, scratching with his teeth into the epoxy. And he put like a series of 8 long gouges in the epoxy top with his teeth. It's like, what are you doing? We didn't even had it for 15 minutes. Kids and furniture.
Andy, he was what, like 5? Has it been 3 years?
It's been about 6.
Okay, that really doesn't excuse.
Yeah, and the chair he sits in, the whole back is just chewed out because he'll turn around and just gnaw on the chair. Like, what's up with that?
He's missing fiber.
I guess. So enough of that. We've got questions coming up. If you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. I know we're not going to be able to get to all of them, as usually the case, unless you throw up a super chat, in which case then we will jump to yours. So what is the first one on the list?
Let's see. Alex, what did Alex have? I was trying to strip old finish with my scraper plane. It kind of worked in places, but in some left lines, in some got perpendicular from vibration. Was it not too sharp or something else with the technique?
Okay. First, Sarah, can you make sure your microphone is pointed at you? Because it looks like it's pointed up the other direction when you turn your head towards the monitor. It can't be heard. Or if you can put it on your right side so it's closer when you turn to the monitor.
Being very picky all of a sudden.
I'm helping you guys out so you can actually hear her, because she is very soft-spoken and meek. So cabinet scrapers on finish. Often cabinet scrapers are one of the easiest ways to get rid of finish, but that kind of depends on the finish. It doesn't work as well on paint, especially if the paint is either new or really old. If it's really old, it's brittle and just kind of like jumps around on it. If it's new, it kind of clogs it up and gunks up in the plane. But for most regular finishes, stains and your lacquers and varnishes and polys, a cabinet scraper usually cuts right through it. If it's jumping around on that, it's just not sharp. And most of the time, that's the problem: is you don't have a good hook on there. You haven't built up that hook that's wanting to dig in and scrape it out, and so it's just a 90-degree edge that's bouncing along the surface. So usually that's the first thing I'm going to say. But if it's really old paint, in that case, you're usually better off getting a plane and planing the paint off, at least getting it down close to wood, and then you bring in the card scraper to clean it out. That's often what I find to work the best. That doesn't help when you get into little corners, but yeah. So I hope that answered your question. What's next?
Dwayne, can I do woodworking in my basement with all hand tools and not get sawdust throughout the entire house?
Well, let me ask you, Sarah, do you find sawdust throughout our house?
Not really. It stops at about the basement stairs. So you get about 10, 15 feet out of the shop maybe. And even that, it's usually the big wood curl. It's not sawdust. So no.
It's one of the nice things about hand tools is we think of sawdust, and you think about a regular power tool shop, is sawdust is made by the router and the planer, and it's made by the saws, and it's made by the chop saw, and it's made by the router table, and everything that touches the wood makes sawdust. Well, historically, and with hand tools, the only tool that makes sawdust is a saw. That's why it's called sawdust. Planes make curls, chisels make chips, scrapers make curls, everything else makes these big chunks that fall quickly. They don't float in the air and drift around. Even the dust that comes off of saws is a very heavy, thick dust, and it tends to fall very quickly as compared to power tool dust. Plus, you don't have the fans from power tools blowing it all over the place. So it's not something that really tracks around. Sawdust generally doesn't track much on shoes. What does is, like, if you have your socks, that curl connects onto that, and you'll drag it around the house, and you'll have one curl that drops off somewhere. And so it's usually not a huge issue. One of the other things that I have is we tend to have socks in our house. We don't wear shoes as much in the house, and so I have a pair of shop shoes, my clogs. And these just slide on and off at the door, and when I come back on, they slide on. So it doesn't take any time at all to put my shoes on and off as I leave the door. That way my shoes aren't tracking anything around. So that can be a great way to do it if you do have problems with that. But yeah, with hand tools, there really isn't much of a dust problem.
I think the bigger complaint is me tripping over your clogs than it is
So I try to leave them in here rather than in the shop now.
Don't know how many times I've... Anyways, moving on.
Next.
You have big feet. Dennis Meko, how do we keep our furniture from smelling like stinky old furniture in 50 years?
Make new furniture.
Well, that's a solution.
Easy answer, yeah. Honestly, most of the time with old furniture, it's the finish. So you can refinish it at that time, or you can apply another oil on top of it, something to revitalize. There's a reason that a lot of old houses smell like pledge, because they've been re-pledged over and over and over again until the point you have like this cakey smudge on top from dusting gunk. Or what is the other one? The Old English oil.
Oh, yeah.
No. Just dust it. But yeah, eventually, wood and finish, they develop an old smell. That's just something that comes with most things. When they get old, they develop a smell. Go to a nursing home. But yeah, new coat of finish does amazing things. Yeah. What's next?
I'll keep my comments to myself.
I know, I developed the smell a while ago.
All right. Alex S., how can I get the most precise drawer width dimensions when joining with dovetails? Piston fit, question mark. I need to fit it in the rails. If this is what you mean, like it has to be exactly 3/8 less than cabinet opening.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So if it's pistons fit, that means there are no rails. That means that the drawer front is exactly the same width as the drawer opening. It fits in and out like a piston. So what you're doing is a rail opening. So you have rails that go in between the opening and the drawer itself, and then the drawer connects into those rails. So you need to have that spacing of the rails, but if the gap is too wide, then it pulls the wheel off of the rails, and you've got this drawer that never stays on the rails. It's always wanting to bounce off. And the best piece of advice I can get is fit your drawer front first. Before you build the rest of your drawer, fit your drawer front. And so make the drawer front a little longer than it needs to be, and then take it over the shooting board and take a couple shavings off and fit it in between those rails. Make sure it fits, or take a few more shavings off and just keep doing that until it gets down to just the size you want. And what you probably want to do is make it ever so slightly larger, like a 32nd of an inch, or maybe as much as a 16th of an inch larger than what you're going to want for your finished product. Then you take your drawer front and you match it up and you cut your drawer back exactly the same as the drawer front. And then you make your drawer sides however long you want them to be. You dovetail it all together, and because you made the drawer ever so slightly larger, you're going to have this box that doesn't quite fit in there. And so at that point you plane down the sides of the box until it gets down to the size that's exactly for that drawer. Now if this was machine made and absolutely perfect, every drawer space would be exactly the same. But we're all humans and we all make minute, ever so slight changes. And so being able to adjust a drawer specifically to that drawer slot gives you a little bit of function. But often just putting the drawer in a vise and planing a little bit off the surface, checking it, and then planing a little bit more off the surface and checking it again works pretty well. It's the exact same thing for piston fit. It's even more so with piston fit because then a lot of times the sides aren't perfectly square. Whereas for rails, you're just measuring from rail to rail. So make it a little larger, it needs to be, and then shave it down a little bit later. Because when you're doing dovetail sides, you'll have the end grain of the dovetail sticking up, and then you'll have the face grain that you're planing off this way. So you plane from the outside towards the middle, and then from the outside towards the middle, so you're never splintering off the dovetails and busting them out as you're planing them. But if you want, I have a whole video on how to piston fit dovetails. And I've got a couple other videos on making dovetail drawers. And I've actually got a project coming up today. I was just working on a series of dovetails, so there'll be another one coming. What's next?
Tommy Roberts. Do you have a big gouge, like 1.5 to 2 inches? And if so, do you use it much? I see Andy Rawls use his, and it looks nice for shaping.
Yes, I have two. Here's one that I recently got. And so this is probably about 2 inch across-ish. That's a little less than that, maybe 1.75 inches. And it's with a fingernail grind rather than a straight grind, so I wanted to try this. This one needs to be sharpened, but to be honest, no. I have two of them. I've only used one once, and that was because I just wanted to try it out. I have never used this one, and the other one I've never actually used directly in a project. I might be using it on one coming up here soon because I'm making a seat, and I'm going to be carving this out. And this is actually Brazilian ipe, which I'm regretting using because it's incredibly dense and very, very hard. But I may end up using this to actually carve out, but we'll see. I haven't quite gotten to that point yet. So, do you need one? No.
Is that something you could use for lathe work or no?
Yeah, you could. And this one basically is lathe size.
That's what I was thinking. But
the actual applications for one are very slim. You don't use them that much. Is it necessary or a really useful tool? No. There are people who use it quite a bit, but that's because they do a lot of particular types of woodworking that might need large gouge out work. But for me, it doesn't happen that very often. What's next?
Hang on 1 second. Sorry, thought I was going to burp. Aaron Linville asked, how do you set up / adjust a wooden skew rabbet plane? Excuse me. I've been getting terrible blowout along the edge, even when I saw a kerf across the grain, and the base of the rabbets have been uneven too.
Yeah, skewed rabbet planes are not easy. I have a video making this one, and this is actually this was a video between me and Bearcat Woodworking, and this one was a really fun one to make. We were doing shoulder planes, so this is actually at the video. It's listed as a shoulder plane, but one of the most common problems is that if the iron is sticking out at all past the side of this, then you're going to be scraping off with this. And there are woodworkers who like to do that. Paul Sellers actually likes to have the blade sticking out, 64th or 100th of an inch more than the side of this. What I like to do is lay it flat on the bench, and with that, adjust the plane so that the side is exactly the same spot as the side of the plane. Because if it's in, then you're not going to be cutting anything in the corner, and it's just going to be bouncing around on you. And if it's out too far, especially on the first couple, you're going to have a lot of tear out where this is ripping apart the grain. But it sounds like you are trying to go cross grain, and anytime you're going cross grain, you need to have a spur or a nicker in the blade to actually score it in front of the cut. And so basically it's a knife that sticks down in front of the cut and will make a score or a cutting of the fibers, so that when the blade comes through, it's not actually splintering off the fibers, it's just removing what has been scored right in front of it. So yeah, if you're going cross grain, you have to have a spur on there. Otherwise, what you can do is use a marking knife and mark it, and then take a pass, and then mark it with a knife and take a pass, and then mark it with a knife and take a pass. But I'm assuming that's what you're talking about with tear out. If you're having problems with it already by cutting down a wall and running along it, that's probably because your blade is sticking out too far on the side. If it's sticking out too far, you're just going to be scratching up your wall and making a mess of it. So put the iron in until it's perfectly flush with the side. And if you have a knife wall, if you have a saw cut already in there, you can actually recess the blade into the body a little bit, so it's not even flush with the outside, it's in a little bit because the saw blade has already taken off that material, so that the only thing touching that sidewall is the side of the plane. But hope that answered your question. What we got next?
Let's see. Peter DeWitt. Coping versus fret saw. What is the difference and when to use each?
A coping saw is a saw for coping trim. So if you have two trim pieces coming together, rather than cutting them at a 45, you cut one of them to have the profile of the other one so they butt into each other. That's coping. And so it's a saw designed to do the coping work. A fret saw is a coping saw. Exactly the same thing.
No. Correct answer is when you're having anxiety.
Yes. Fret saw. In more common vernacular, a fret saw tends to have a smaller, thinner blade, so it can make a smaller turn. So you can turn pretty much at any point. Whereas a coping saw tends to have a blade that's about an 1/8 inch thick, 1/8 inch wide, and so you can't quite make the same radius. But in general, the saw, the frame itself, that could be called a coping saw, or it could be called a fret saw. It's basically the exact same thing. The next difference is a jeweler's saw. And a jeweler's saw, basically the only difference with it is how the blade is connected. With a fret saw, you have these connection points in the end, so the blade actually has a cross peen that goes in there and will hook into these little hooking notches on here. Whereas a fret saw, you have these two nuts, and it actually will clamp the blade and hold it down in place and squeeze it. So the fret saw, the jeweler's saw, will squeeze the blade. And so a lot of people love a jeweler's saw because it's a lot easier to get the blades in and out, because you can just loosen the nut, and there's actually a bit of a spring on this. So then you can slide this back in, squeeze it together, tighten the nut back down, and there, it's in place. And so it's a really easy one to change. You're not trying to fiddle with it and trying to get it in these little notches. But fret saw, coping saw, most of the time they refer to the exact same thing. Though there are a lot of people out there who will get very finicky about, no, a fret saw is this and a coping saw is that. And then you'll have other people who say, no, it's the exact opposite. And a coping saw does coping on trim work. A fret saw is, there. What's next?
Let's see. Hang on one second.
I'm
I
hanging.
think I skipped over one. So, Dr. Khan said was recently in Lancaster, gotta say it right, PA, and was able to get a deal on an 81 that needs a new sole. I've seen videos replacing it with endgrain down. Is it better, or should I do it face grain down? And as an aside, I'll be using Padauk since I don't have a large enough piece of rosewood.
Honestly, it doesn't make a difference. The benefits of having the end grain facing down is that you have a much harder surface, and it has a little bit more wear resistance on there. It burnishes a little bit better. But it's going to not last quite as long because you tend to get these little fibers on the end that break off over time, and it chips away. Whereas if you have it with a flat grain, it's going to wear out a bit faster, but you're not going to get any chip out on it. Some people say it just doesn't burnish as well. In the end, it's just a personal preference. So don't sweat it. Do whatever's easiest or whatever you want to do. If you want to give it a try, go for it. If not, then don't worry. There is no best. What's next?
Unless you're Sarah. Anyways, sorry.
Very true. She is by far the best.
And don't I deserve the best? Sorry, that's my Beauty and Beast coming out. We had a little spider friend coming down over here too. I digress. S.J. LaRue, what did they ask? James, I don't have a lathe. Do you know of a good supplier for spindles, like Windsor chair spindles?
No, I don't. I know there was a place called chairlegs.com or something like that. It was like turned legs, or no, maybe it was tablelegs.com. And they had a whole selection of those. And I actually did a table a while ago with turned legs from them, because it was 4x4 beefy legs.
Excuse me.
But yeah, it's been a long, long time since I've looked for that, so I don't know. I would have to do a Google search on that. So sorry, wouldn't be the best person to answer that. But if you do have a question like that, it'd be a good one to throw into the HiveMind. We have one HiveMind group on Facebook, as well as the Discord HiveMind server. So we bounce a lot of ideas off that, and I'm sure someone out there has found a place that works out well, but I have not, so sorry. What's next?
Okay, this is a new name for me. Yaroslav Veremenko? So sorry. Going to build my first bench, and I found an old Mastercraft vise for cheap. I thought about mounting it as an end vise and then building leg vise later. Is it a bad idea?
As to what vise is really up to you. There are a lot of people out there who use their leg vise all the time for everything, and it works out great. I almost never use my leg vices. I have them here because I occasionally like to demonstrate things. But honestly, if I had a bench without a leg vise, it probably wouldn't hurt me. I think the only reason I use the leg vise is to hold onto the shooting board or the bench hook. And even then, I don't really need it because it pushes up against the side. My preference would be put it on the end and use it as an end vise. This is the one I use almost all the time. It is an end vise. It is a what's the word for? A face vise. It's got the it's all vices in one. I use this constantly for everything I do. Even on my old my old bench, I had a vise that was very similar to what you have, and I used that on the end. So if you go look at my old videos, I was using that all the time, and I absolutely love working on the corner and the end of the bench. In the end, it's a very personal preference. A lot of people don't like that. A lot of people like something else. You'll never know until you try it yourself and find out what works for you. So yeah, if it were me, use it as an end vise, tail vise, and that would be awesome. And when you want to, then you can make a leg vise in the future.
Yeah, back to the spindle question. Moonwolf made a good point. Anne of all trades probably would know. She does a lot with.
Possibly, yeah.
And I think there's a.
She does a lot of her own though.
She does a lot of her own, and then there's I know on Instagram I think it's Ashley Hardwood Turning.
Mm-hmm.
Does a lot. I don't know. Things to look up. People I now follow because apparently I'm a woodworker now. I don't know.
It will inundate your feed if you let it.
You know, it does actually. It's kind of scary, the percentage. Brad's workbench. Do you think power tools are a must if you're running a business?
If you are building things to sell, unless you have a name for yourself as handmade, high-end, valuable craftsman who does everything with hand tools, unless you've built that name for yourself, you need power tools, because you're never going to be able to recoup your time off of building things with just hand tools. There are always certain steps that thicknessing lumber, you don't want to waste your time doing that by hand. You want to have a thickness planer to run it through. Ripping things down, having a table saw or a bandsaw to rip things through, it's almost necessary to save the time needed to actually complete the task in a manner that you can make money on. So yeah, if you're wanting to sell furniture or sell things you make, power tools are the way to go. Hand tools are there if you want to slow down and you want to enjoy the process rather than just the product. Hand tools are about the experience, not about the efficiency. If you, oh, come on. I forgot his name. Yeah, never mind, keep going. I'll remember it later. What's next?
All right. Kenny-Anjanette Horn asks, what's your process for coming up with the continual stream of ideas for videos? I nix probably 80% of the ideas on my list because I don't have time for them, or there's a better idea. My list is so much longer than I will ever have time to make videos for. There's an infinite amount of video ideas out there, and a lot of my videos I'll redo a topic. Like I have 12 or so videos on how to sharpen a saw, but there's a lot of little intricacies, and I may change my method over the years and be like, oh, no, this is how actually I do it now, or let me show you a different type of saw, or here's an odd thing that comes in. You know, there might be one topic such as sharpening a saw, but there are 100 different ways to do it and different applications, and there are so many different videos out there, and there's an infinite amount of furniture to build. So I'll just make the smallest dent I possibly can and eventually get through it. I'll die before it's done, but yeah, there's lots of video ideas out there. James's to-do list is...
It's always longer than the time provided.
Yes. We don't talk about the to-do list. No, we do. But Tiny Woodshop. Have you made a video on making miter dovetails?
I'm assuming you're talking about, well, you can do like the end miter dovetails. I don't think I have. There's another video topic to do.
Yeah, that's also how he gets his ideas.
Have I done a miter dovetail on a video? I don't think there is. I generally do not. I've done flat miter dovetails. I did those in the joinery window. No, those weren't dovetails. Those were just those were half miter. What am I thinking? No, I've never done a miter dovetail in a video.
Should I look it up?
No, I'm pretty sure.
You're pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure.
Pretty sure.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I don't like miter dovetails. I don't like the look of it. It's like trying to hide the joinery, and I want to show the joinery and show how it's functioned. But I should probably do that sometime.
You do a miter dovetail in the window thing, though, don't you?
Well, no, I was thinking about that, but it's actually, that's a mitered half-lined, not mitered dovetail. Same concept, same idea, just different angle. Yeah, I should do that. So, well, another one that's been on my list to show is the full blind dovetail, not just the half blind. So when it goes together, it looks like a
You'll
miter
never
joint.
see
You
it
don't see
coming.
anything at all. You don't see the dovetails at all, but inside there's a full dovetail connection, which is a lot of fun, though very complicated. So maybe we'll see that one sometime. Be a good live. Watch James make a mess of a miter dovetail because he has to get it done in under a half an hour. What's next?
Chris Eggers, I have a chip in my hand plane about an 1/8 inch deep into the blade, right in the middle. What's the best way to get it back to a cutting edge?
In my shop, it's a really aggressive sandpaper, something like a 36 to a 50 grit sandpaper, and just grind it off. Yeah. You need to get past the chip, and so sometimes that's nasty. If you hit a nail or something that's in the wood, it's not happy. But yeah, you got to grind it off. If you have a bench grinder, you can do it on that. But with something that big, you're going to have to be very, very careful you don't overheat the tip. It's very, very easy to do on a bench grinder. So basically, you're going to have it on there with very light pressure going back and forth, about 5 or 6 seconds. Stop, cool it off in the water, dry it off. Another 5 or 6 seconds of grinding. Stop, cool it off, dry it off. Another 5 or 6 seconds of grinding, and it's probably about a half an hour of grinding to do that, unless you have a slow speed grinder or you really want to push that edge of how hot can you get it. But if you're ever grinding it and you suddenly see on the tip it's blue, you've ruined the temper on the blade, and you always have that soft spot there. So yeah, be very, very careful. If you do ruin the temper on it, the way you fix that is you grind past that, get down to new metal, and so that just means more grinding. But the nice thing about the sandpaper is it actually goes pretty quickly. I could grind through an 1/8 inch in 15-20 minutes on a piece of sandpaper. It'd be good to go. So have fun. What's next?
So Alex wants to know how many tails is a good choice for a dovetailing drawer with 6.5 inch height sides. Is 3 good?
Yeah, 3 would be great. In the end, it's whatever is aesthetically pleasing to you. In general, you never want the space on the end to have more pin than dovetail. So you generally want at least the same amount of dovetail space to pin space. But that may go all the way up to 2/3 of the space being tails, 1/3 of it being pins. Some people will push that way up to the end and have like 90% of the space tails and 10% of the space pins. I don't really like doing that. It's just an aesthetic choice. It actually makes the joint a little bit weaker, but not a huge amount. So yeah, lay it out, draw it on a piece of paper and say, does this look good? If it looks good, great, do it. If it doesn't look good, then try a different design. Just draw it out on a piece of paper and see how it fits out and how it looks to you. But in the end, it all just comes down to aesthetics. What looks good to you? And what looks good to you will not look good to someone else, and what looks good to someone else, you'll look at and go, ugh. So, personal preference. I need to rename the channel that. Personal preference. What's next?
I thought you'd say happy little wood curls. Aidan Mohammed wants to know how to identify very old Purple Heart.
You look at it and see if it's Purple Heart. I'm assuming you're referring to the fact that Purple Heart will eventually turn brown unless you have it really well sealed. Oxygen will turn it brown, UV will turn it brown. You have to either keep the air out and fully encapsulate it, or keep it out of the sunlight, or have a UV finish on it. In which case, then you can generally keep the purple quite a long while. But most of the time, it's going to disappear. Once it's done, it's brown. How do you tell it from other woods? It kind of still has its own interesting look. Though it does end up, Padauk and Purple Heart end up being very, very similar. They tend to have a very similar color. And the only way to know for sure is to send it off for chemical testing. But it's one of those things that you kind of get an eye for, but the only way to get that's experience. So, yeah. How do you know what this brown wood is? Because you know what that brown wood is. About the only answer.
Scratch the bottom of it. Let's see. Daniel Walsh. I just bought my first hand plane, a Stanley number 4 new. I've sharpened it and I think the sole is flat, but I can't seem to get a nice consistent cut. The cuts keep coming out jagged and really rough, if at all.
Okay. One thing is if you are planing something like a red oak and you're comparing it to someone who's planing a soft maple is incredibly buttery and comes out with these nice glossy, sheeny shavings. And red oak always comes out in this splintered, dusty mess. And so first look at the type of wood you're doing. If it's a ring porous wood, you're never going to get a really nice, clean, silky curl out of it unless you're doing things to the nth degree. Most of the time, the problem is it's not sharp enough. And I know you're going to say, yes, it is sharp enough. I've heard that literally hundreds of times. And then once someone actually gets to the point where it's sharp enough, they're like, oh, that's what sharp feels like. Yes. Kitchen knives. The sharpest kitchen knife you've ever held in your hand is not sharp enough. Unless you're a professional kitchen knife sharpener, that sharp on a plane is incredibly sharp. So that's usually the problem, is the plane isn't sharp enough. Yeah, and don't expect it to be sharp from the factory. If you got it from the factory, it's not sharp. I can guarantee it, especially if it's a new Stanley Sweetheart. They don't come sharp. But most of the time, sharpness is first. Number 2, you're either trying to take off too heavy of a cut or you're taking off too fine of a cut. If it's too fine of a cut, it might be bouncing around a little bit. If it's a new plane, the sole is flat enough. Don't worry about that. That's not something to think about. People really put a lot of emphasis on having a really perfectly flat sole. That is not necessary in the least, unless you're getting into incredibly fine woodworking. Don't worry about that. But check the sharpness. That'd be the first thing I'd do. What's next?
So Theo Brock asked, have you thought about incorporating more wooden planes into your workflow? I've ditched my number 4 for a coffin smoother and my number 5 for a nice razy jack, and I really prefer them.
Yes, I have done a good bit with wooden and transitional. I don't like them as much. There is a nice feeling for the wood sliding along. It has a good friction to it, and it feels buttery. I just don't find them as quite as comfortable. I don't find them to be as efficient as I like them to be. I really, really like working with metal planes. Again, personal preference. I tried them. Do they fit into my workflow and what I like? No. But I know a lot of people who absolutely love wooden planes, love transitionals, and that's all they use. And if you're that person, awesome, go to it. In the end, the actual function and finish of the plane and what you can get out of it, you can get the exact same work out of a wooden plane that you can get out of any metal plane, and vice versa. So which one you choose doesn't make a difference on the actual quality of your work. It just comes down to which one do you prefer to play with. And if I had a perfectly set up coffin smoother and a perfectly set up number 4, I'm probably going to grab the number 4 just because I like the feel of it more. But personal preference.
So Chuck Bush wants to know, can you explain how to sharpen a froe and how sharp it should be?
A froe. Well, I sharpen my froe with a Gillette razor.
You've been waiting to use that joke. I know
Yeah.
you have.
Oh, I'm kicking myself over last week with Rex and me, and we're both talking about froes, and neither of us even thought to mention it. But yeah.
Oh, but one of your viewers did it on the comments.
Yeah. So for a froe, let me grab what I normally do. I sharpen it to about the point I sharpen an axe. And where did my sharpening puck go? Well, stink. I guess I will use this instead and imagine it's a sharpening puck. So I generally use a sharpening puck, which is it looks like a hockey puck. One side, it's a whetstone, and there's 2 different types on there. And I sharpen it just like I would my axe, and so if you imagine this, I'm going to put it on there and just like that up the side. And that's how I do it. They don't need to be crazy sharp. A froe doesn't actually cut the wood from slicing action. You're not slicing the fibers. It's just going to work its way down into the fibers a little bit. And then the thing that breaks it is the rotational force of the arm. So the froe doesn't actually cut fibers. So it doesn't have to be really sharp. That's why you get a big mallet and you bash this thing down into the wood. It just has to be sharp enough-ish. The rotational force of the handle is what does the actual work. So yeah, you don't really need to overthink it. I probably actually get my axes sharper than I get my froe. So it's a very coarse work tool. Don't think it has to be razor sharp. So I hope that answers your question, but that might actually make a good video sometime. So we'll think about that. What's next?
Warren Munn says Laura Kampf did a video where she was joining 2 large boards for a table and temporarily glued them together, one on top of the other, offset to get a matched cut. What do you think of this idea?
I don't think I've seen that video. Temporarily glued the 2 on top of each other. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you take 2 boards and you attach them together like this so you can cut them down and they end up being the exact same size and shape. Sure. Yeah. It's another functional way to do it. But I haven't seen that video. I'll have to go take a look for it. I don't think I've seen one of hers in a while. I'm going to have to look that up. The YouTube algorithm hiding someone from me.
I think that's because you've been watching a lot of space.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of telescope items and things of that nature recently.
Bailey Woodworks. I see a lot of people use a lot of glue and clamps. Is there a rule of thumb of how much glue or how many clamps for a glue up?
Yes. Well, when you're working with a PVA glue, which I don't have any right here, so a standard wood glue, white or yellow, it needs about 100 pounds of pressure to get its full bonding strength. You need about that much in order for the glue to be stronger than the wood around it. If you have less than that, then the glue will still be pretty strong, but the glue seam may break before the wood around it does. Now that doesn't mean 100 psi. That means 100 pounds of pressure at any point on the board. So theoretically, if you do a sprung joint, in other words, you take the 2 boards and you plane the joint edge of them and you put an ever so slightly shallow concave curve in it. And I'm talking like 1/16 of an inch lower in the middle than it is on the 2 corners. So when you bring the 2 together, there's like a 1/16 inch gap in the middle. Then what you do is you have 1 clamp in the middle that will squeeze that gap out, and that will give you an even pressure all the way along, in which case then you need 1 clamp. Let me show you this one here. I actually have a panel glue up over here, and in this one, flip it up, I've got 5 clamps on this, and it may look like I have a lot of clamps needing a lot of pressure on that thing, but I don't actually have much pressure on it. It's actually a fairly light amount of pressure on each of those. The reason I have so many clamps on there is I need to keep all those panels together. I don't want them bending out one way or the other. I don't want the boards to kink out because they're only a 1/4 inch thick, and so I have a very thin wall. So I have a lot of clamps on either side just to stabilize them so that they're all parallel. Now I could get parallel clamps. I'd like to get a set of those. I haven't gotten them, but I do it so rarely that just having a bunch of regular clamps to hold them together and actually pushing the clamps up against the joint and keeping them parallel works perfectly fine. The general rule of thumb is if you are doing a even panel glue up, is you need a clamp every foot-ish. If you are doing a big lamination like a bench with 1 inch thick boards and you've got 20 boards or so to squeeze up, then you're probably going to want to put a clamp every 6 inches along there. So you can get about 100 pounds of pressure across the whole lamination. Because you want to have 100 pounds of pressure at any point in a board. So if you're clamping up a whole bunch of laminations, then you might have a bunch of them that are holding back, and so you have one gap in between a set of boards, and so you have to have enough pressure to clamp them all. Now, one of the other misconceptions is that you can squeeze out the glue and starve the joint of glue, and that is a complete falsehood. You will never be able to starve the wood. If you crush the wood down, the wood is going to break before all the glue squeezes out. There's always gaps and crevices for the glue to be in. So you will never be able to over clamp the joint. So if you have to fail one way or the other, fail by over clamping it rather than under clamping it. But you don't need to do that. You need about 100 pounds of pressure, which is slightly more than you can get from a squeeze clamp. With a squeeze clamp, it's usually get these up around 60, 70 pounds of squeezing force, so you usually need a little bit more than that. But not too much. So that gives you an idea of how much pressure is needed. But as to a rule of thumb, no. The bigger the board, the more you have to squeeze together to get that 100, the more clamps you'll need. So that's the standard. What's next?
Let's see. John Murphy says, I finished a tabletop with 3 steps. First, I used tint dye, second armor seal a cell, and last 3 coats of armor seal. Sanded slightly between all steps. It still feels a little rough. Any advice?
All right, can you read that list again?
Oh my gosh.
Dye, armor seal sealing,
so,
and then 3 coats of
tint dye, armor seal a cell, and 3 coats of Armaseal.
Okay.
And then sanding in between.
3 coats of a poly is not much at all. 3 coats of that is you're going to still feel the wood. It's going to be a very open finish, which is what I like. I like to have that feel of the finish on there. Usually when I'm working with a poly, I'm going at least 5 coats, if not up to 8 coats. Very thin coats, and in between every other coat. So after every odd coat, after every even coat, I'll hit it with a 400 grit very quickly, and that will give me the finish I want. I'm not usually a huge fan of high gloss finishes. Those take a lot more work, and I don't like the look, but personal preference. So, but yeah, if you only have 3 coats of poly on, you're not going to be getting a glass finish. It's going to take quite a few more of that. If you want a really nice gloss finish with poly, you need at least 8, if not more, good thin coats. So I would do more than that. But I would say if it's rough to begin with, and you want that really clean, smooth surface, I would have sanded originally with something much higher. If I'm going for a clean, smooth surface, I'm probably going to sand it up to like a 300 grit before then putting in the rest of it. But understand, like my usual preference is I'm going to sand up to like 220, and then I'm going to wet down the surface so I can raise the grain, and then I'm going to hit it with a 300, and that will give me my nice polished surface that I can then put in the stain and sealer and so on. Although I don't know why you would want to use a sealer before a poly. I would just put the poly right on top of the that, but yeah, I guess it wouldn't hurt. Usually you'd want to put the sealer on before putting the dye on so that you get an even coat matching them. Very important if you're working with maple or pine or something like that where you can get these blotchy surfaces. The sealer will give you a much more even color. But usually you do that before you're coloring or stain. What's next?
Well, I'm very honored by this next question, and I'm going to give my answer, and then you're going to give your answer, okay? So, Allan Hundeby said, for Sarah, when starting as a newbie woodworker, or noob woodworker, can you recommend a sequence of projects needed to build a woodworking bench, I'm assuming like yours? Example, 1 saw bench, then 2 a shooting board, then etc. So my answer is that we made my bench pretty much as if you had no other. I mean, we had hand tools and saws, but we did use your saw bench thing, but you could just use like 2 sawhorses or any lateral flat surface. Yeah. Okay, now your answer.
Yeah, we used the saw bench just like it was a table.
Yeah, I mean,
just a horizontal surface.
I never used a shooting board.
No.
So I guess unless I don't know why you would need one.
Yeah, my general rule of thumb is build the bench first. The bench is your goal. Build the bench. Is it going to be perfect? No. Is it going to be amazing? No. Will it be functional? Yes. You will learn so much on the bench that everything else will work much better. And having a bench then makes everything else so much better. You will never build a great bench until you have a bench to build it on. So build a bench first. And just realize it's not going to be your forever bench. It's not going to be your favorite bench. It's going to be your first bench. And there will always be another bench. Until the day you die, or the day you're planning on dying, you will always have another bench that you want to make. So build a bench, and you may end up having to build things to make the bench. Like in my case, when I was making my first one, I didn't have any clamps, and so I made clamps. And so I made these on a folding table. Yeah, I made a marking gauge to make these because I didn't have clamps. If I had clamps, it would be almost nothing I would make other than the bench itself. Most of the time you're starting out, you don't have all the tools, and you might need to make a tool to get a particular step done. But with a bench, there isn't that much to it that you have to build to make it. So no, you don't really need anything other than the bench itself.
Yeah, and I mean, we used the saw bench because that was what was there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, if you go back and watch some of the earliest videos on the channel, it's me making my first bench in the shop, and I had a folding table, and I built it all on top of a folding table, just pushing work up against a wall so that the wall would be the planing stop. You don't need anything else. And one of the big reasons why I tell you to make a bench is, number one, it's going to teach you so much that you're going to need to learn. But number two, everything else will be so much easier once you have a bench. A bench it makes everything you make so much more enjoyable. If you're trying to make things without having the bench, you are going to be frustrated, it is going to be painful, and it is going to zap all the fun out of it. Make a bench first, because everything else you make is going to be so much more enjoyable. There's my tirade.
But I would agree. There's a lot you can do. And you don't need a lot. I mean, we bought the vise.
Yeah, if you make your bench top, you can set it on a pair of sawhorses, and you have a functional bench. It's not going to be quite as stable or as sturdy, but you're going to have a functional bench. You can then build the legs for the bench.
And then maybe after you build your bench, your spouse won't immediately use it as a device to hold.
A good horizontal surface.
Let's see. Michael C. Planning on making a keepsake box out of Brazilian cherry. How is it to work with?
I've never used Brazilian cherry, so I don't know. But if it's like any other cherry, it's fantastic. Cherry is like the most pleasurable hand tool wood. It's smooth, it's creamy, it's just delightful to use. It's so forgiving and soft, and curls are gorgeous. Cherry is delightful. Walnut is delightful. I've never used Brazilian cherry though. Anytime you throw Brazilian into it, you usually get a little more painful.
Leave it at that.
But
we digress. Anyways, Brandon Chanel, what size blade is that fro you just had?
It's, 14 inches? It's 12 inches. There you go. Usually 12 inches to 14 inches, that's about the standard size. Any longer than that, it's just not worth it. 10 inches, you can get away with that. Wouldn't be able to do most things, but most are right around that size.
All right, Jack Gallagher, what does he say? Stumpy Nubs was talking about how he prefers square dog holes to round a couple of days ago. Which one do you prefer and why?
He's wrong. No, it's a personal thing. I much prefer round dog holes because I'm always clamping things at odd angles. I have 2 rows of dog holes, and a lot of times I'll actually pivot them so that they're capturing something rather than just having a flat surface coming up against it. I love round dog holes. Yeah, occasionally you'll hit it with something and it will rotate on you and you don't want it to, but that's pretty rare. And I like having the standard of being able to put something at a particular angle, especially with how easy it is to use holdfasts. Yes, you can use holdfasts in some square holes if you make them just right, but most of the time they're not going to work right in a square hole. And I use holdfasts all the time, so that's why I like square holes. Square holes are more adaptable. You can do more things with a square hole than you can. Excuse me, round holes are more adaptable. You can do more things with a round hole than you can with a square hole. And so I love round holes. Not a huge fan of square holes. I'm not much of a square peg, so. What's next?
Alan Isaac. James, you've mentioned that you spent some portion of your life in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Were you influenced by the Amish craftsmen?
No, I actually got into most of my hand tool woodworking after leaving there. But all honesty, the Amish do not use hand tools much. If they're making furniture for a living, they're doing it with power tools. They might have a show for hand tools, but the shop and back is fully powered. The best equipment that they can rent. Depending upon which church, they'll have different rules about what they can use. Some of them, as long as they rent it, it's fine. Some of them, as long as they use it in someone else's shop, it's fine. Some of them, it is. I know one guy who has a pneumatic shop. He has a pneumatic table saw. He has a pneumatic thickness planer, and he has this massive, huge tank out back that holds all of the air. And he pays a guy regularly to come out and fill his tank for him, and runs it all off of pneumatic power, which is just mind-bogglingly crazy, but it's a full power tool shop. He's got all the bells and whistles. Yeah, the Amish would look at what I'm doing and think, "Are you crazy? Who in their right mind would do all things hand tools?" But yeah. Is that
Release
super
the
chat?
Lancaster. They mean it. Yes. Peter DeWitt says, "Thank you, James, for all the videos and Q&A. I just joined your Patreon." Thank you.
Well, thanks to you.
Everyone here should do likewise.
Yeah, for those of you who don't, we do occasional things. We usually have 2 times or so a month where we do a live hangout where I'm working in the shop and I'll turn on the camera and let people jump in, as well as monthly hangouts and quarterly hangouts depending upon rank and level, as well as special ranks when you get on the Discord server. There's specialty things you can get into there other people can't. Yay. So do you have a mom joke?
Yes. How does the sky pay its bills? With a rain check.
Yes, that's the rain check. I was going through rain coins, cloud coins, bit rain. I don't know. I couldn't come up with something. Rain check.
Thinking too hard. Andrew Seymour, how much could a river coffee table go for? I'm struggling with my pricing. I spent about $250 in materials.
Yeah. Never price something on how much does this go for. That you're just going to run yourself into a hole. What you need to do is calculate how much did you spend on it, how much time did you put into it, how much is your time worth. So if your time on a really low going rate is about $20 an hour, for skilled labor, $20 an hour is really low. So if you put into the table, something fell. If you put into the table, say 100 hours at $20, that then comes out to $2,000. So then you put $200 worth of material into it, plus $2,000, the table is then worth $2,200. And depending upon your name and how much you can pull, that could be very easily sellable. Like the dining room table I built, if I were to sell it to someone, it would probably be somewhere in the range of $15,000 to $20,000. And so that's why I don't sell much that I make, because I would price it at what it would cost me to make it. I do not suggest that anyone go by a standard river coffee table costs this much, because there are so many different variations in quality, in character, in name, the person who made it, the history behind it, that prices can go anywhere from $100 up to $40,000. They can go anywhere in between. So price it for how much time you have in and how much you have in items, and go from there. That's why usually you sell the item before you make it, or at least you have the down payment before you make it, so you can know that you're not just spinning your wheels.
All right, we got 2 more questions and then we'll be done.
Oh, it's 9 o'clock already. Wow. Time flies when you're answering questions.
So Tim Dorsey says, butterfly or epoxy to secure cracks in reclaimed projects?
A butterfly will stop a crack from spreading farther. So if you have a crack that is just slowly growing over time, a butterfly will hold it together. But a butterfly still allows a little bit of expansion and contraction. It's something that has a bit of a give to it. So a butterfly won't hold things perfectly. It will allow things to move a little bit, but it won't allow that crack to spread further. And so if you're trying to hold together 2 boards that aren't connected anywhere, a butterfly is not great for that. A butterfly will help at that, but the boards can still move around. Epoxy, on the other hand, isn't an incredibly strong connection between the 2, and if that crack wants to spread farther, it's going to rip apart from the epoxy, and the epoxy won't hold it very much. So you can actually combine the 2 and have the best of both worlds. Use epoxy for the look. Don't use epoxy for the function. Epoxy is not a great holder together of large cracks. It is there for appearances and aesthetics. So think about it in that mindset. The reason the butterflies are often called Dutchmen, because it's kind of the slang for a Dutchman woodworker was a cheap woodworker, and so they'd use the cracked wood and try and hide the deficiency by putting in butterflies. And so it's a way to salvage wood that is cracked and still keep it functional, stopping the crack from spreading further. So that's why they work out very well for that. What's next?
Okay. Before I do the next question, your shirt's getting lots of attention.
Oh yes, my DeLorean.
Let's see. Mostafa Nategh, I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that. Do you think it's possible to build plywood cabinets using hand tools only?
Oh yeah, you can work with plywood with hand tools, no problem. Plywood is a little bit more difficult to work with hand tools because you're always working in a cross grain situation. You're never purely ripping it. So if you're planing, you always have to think about planing cross grain. If you're just cutting, you have to always be using a cross cut saw. When you're doing anything, you always have to think about going against the grain. So if you're cutting in a rabbet, you have to have spurs and nickers on there so that you're actually getting a good clean cut. So it takes a bit more work because you're always going cross grain no matter what you do. But can it be done? Oh yeah, it works great. It just takes a little more work, but very doable. So don't, have fun with it. Cool. Well, I think that will do it for today. Next week we're going to be having on, I can't remember his name now. We're bringing in a new woodworker, and so we're going to be experimenting with helping him set up a hand plane and functioning it, and hopefully answering a lot of those questions that I kind of gloss over, and making it easy for you guys to understand. So, new woodworker one-on-one. See you next week at 8 p.m. CST. I think I'll do it. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye. Cool.